Carmel Cipollone.
Mr Speaker, the previous member might be proud of the government's accomplishments, but there are a lot of people in this House that are far from proud of the government's accomplishments, Mr Speaker, if you can call them accomplishments at all. Mr Speaker, on Saturday night I was in Auckland City. I'm seldom in Auckland City, walking down Victoria Street from the TVNZ side down to Queen Street, and Mr Speaker, I haven't been in the city for a long time, but I was saddened by the number of homeless people that were out on that street, Mr Speaker. And the last time I was in the city, walking down that same street, I cannot recall seeing a number close to what I saw on Saturday night. I think perhaps I might have seen one or two homeless people on the street, but not one after another along the side of the road, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, walking along that road, I just thought, where have we come to as a country? And Mr Speaker, it's not just Auckland City that has this problem, it's so many other areas, including even my own electorate. Often we show up to our electorate office in Glen Eden and there's a homeless person sleeping outside of the office. And even in the provinces, my colleague Penny Henare is saying that that same thing is evident. And Mr Speaker, even 4 years ago when I was a Member of Parliament, or 5 years ago when I was a Member of Parliament, and I had an office across the other side of the road from where my current office is, we didn't have the level of homelessness that we're seeing every day. And Mr Speaker, even 5 years ago when I was a Member of Parliament, we did not have the number of constituents walking through our electorate office every day with the housing issues that we're seeing New Zealanders faced with now. So for the national government to say that they are proud of what they've accomplished over the last 7 years, Mr Speaker, I find that shocking, and I think that, in fact, they should be ashamed. New Zealanders are not used to this level of homelessness. We did not grow up seeing homeless people begging on the street every day, Mr Speaker. This is not the Kiwi dream that we were all raised to believe in. In fact, this is a nightmare. It was a nightmare walking up Victoria Street and seeing homeless person after homeless person lining that street, and all I could think of was, actually, national government, you can take responsibility for this. Mr Speaker, we have moved so far away from the Kiwi dream that I think it concerns me as a politician, it concerns me as a New Zealander, and I'm sure there's many New Zealanders out there who are thinking, how are we ever going to be able to find our way back to that Kiwi dream that we all had envisaged? And Mr Speaker, my father was a migrant to this country, and his dream as a new migrant wasn't that different from the stereotypical Kiwi dream that many of us share. All it was, Mr Speaker, was a family, a home, a job, and a better life, actually, for his children as well, so that his children wouldn't have to work the factory floors like he did and many of his generation that came over. And Mr Speaker, I have to point out that it's been really interesting in the House today watching the reaction of John Key, Stephen Joyce, Bill English to Labor's announcement around 3 years free tertiary education, and the fact that they are outraged by it, the fact that they have said it's unaffordable despite the fact that they are considering offering tax cuts, the fact that they say that it's unfair to the waitress who would have to pay for that tertiary education despite the fact that that waitress quite possibly could be studying herself, and the fact that, Mr Speaker, they say they're aspirational for New Zealand, and yet Stephen Joyce talks about the need to curb the demand for tertiary education. I find it really interesting, Mr Speaker, that they would make statements like that, but actually they got their tertiary educations free off the backs of people like my working class freezing worker father, who paid with his taxpayer dollars for them to get their tertiary educations for free, Mr Speaker. Now, the thing that really is unfair is that those tax-paying working class New Zealanders paid for people like Stephen Joyce, Bill English, John Key and others over there to get their tertiary educations, but when their children got to that age where they were able to realise their parents' aspirations for them to get tertiary educations, like I was able to for my own father, actually we were not afforded the same opportunity, and we had to fork out thousands of dollars to pay for our tertiary educations after our parents had paid for their tertiary educations. So I think it's a little bit unfair of people like Stephen Joyce, John Key and Bill English to say that this is completely unaffordable, that this is unnecessary and that this is unfair to New Zealanders, like John Key pointed out for the waitress. Mr Speaker, I think back to the 2008 election where we had to constantly listen to the key lines being run by the national government, and they continue to run them now, around wanting a brighter future for New Zealand, being aspirational for New Zealanders. And I look at those two phrases and I think, well, how much brighter is our future when all we see are people lining the street, homeless, up Victoria Street in the city? And how much brighter is our future when we see constituents coming into our office every day because of the fact that they're homeless, and homeless in the nastiest of ways. Pregnant women living in cars, not sure where they're going to be when they go into labour with their children, whole families living in garages, Mr Speaker, and whole families having to couch surf from home to home. Mr Speaker, that's not the Kiwi dream, that's the Kiwi nightmare that we've been introduced to by that national government over there. Mr Speaker, I've had the privilege for the last year and a bit of holding the social development portfolio for the Labor, for the opposition. And Mr Speaker, when I look at people here who are in the position where they need to seek assistance from our welfare system, all I can see is the fact that National is actually anti-aspirational for these people. So many things have been cut. You would think, or we would think, that during times of unemployment, that is an opportunity for any government to make an investment in people so that not only can these people go on to more secure employment, but so they can increase their earning capacities so that they can better take care of themselves and their families. But that hasn't been the case, Mr Speaker. Instead, what we've seen is a national government who sets a better public service target that is all about benefit reductions, but not about employment outcomes, and we see them doing anything they can to cut people off from the benefit system with no care whatsoever about whether or not they're going on to something else. Mr Speaker, I think some of the things that they've done in this area are dangerous, and the treatment of people that have had to access welfare has been disgusting, and I want to talk about some of those, and then I want to look at the national members over there and see how proud they are of their track record. Let's start with cancer patients. On the benefit, so no longer do we have an invalids or sickness benefit. The government have decided that actually people with cancer or potentially terminal illnesses can go on the job seekers benefit, and regardless of whether or not they're well enough to, there's an expectation that they go in regularly, check in, and that for some of them, despite the fact they're getting radiation and chemotherapy, they have to go and get, they have to constantly go in and prove that they're still unwell, and also show that they're actively seeking work. Mr Speaker, I want to talk about grandparents raising grandchildren and how they've been treated by that government, because we've had a number of cases reported to us by the Grandparents Raising Grandchildren organisation where they've been told by Work and Income New Zealand under that government that they're not entitled to anything to support their grandchildren, Mr Speaker. And what we've been left with are grandparents who actually have ended up being owed in the thousands of dollars by that government because they were not given what they were entitled to. Mr Speaker, Labor is about giving back the Kiwi dream. That's what we're here to do. I am disappointed every day by the things that I see out and about, and by the way in which that government have turned everyday reality for so many New Zealanders into a nightmare. If I have to listen to another national MP say that they're proud of the national government's track record, then I think I'm going to have to exit this House today, Mr Speaker, because I've simply heard enough of that rubbish. Thank you very much.